Okay guys, so we are currently sitting inside of the Hive with Zvi, who is not only the owner of this incredibly unique building, but he is the architect as well. And first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me in your home. It is an honor to be here. This has actually been my favorite building in Melbourne since the day that I discovered it.
Wow, well, welcome, James.
It's so incredibly unique. And would I be correct in saying that it is the first of its kind in terms of graffiti architecture collaboration?
A good and controversial question. In the years leading up to this building being constructed, I spent some time working on theoretical projects, some competitions, some works on paper, and architecture in the realm of ideas only, where I was already quite interested in the intersection point between hip-hop and street culture with architecture. I had grown up in Swaziland and South Africa and Botswana. I think the culture that I'd been exposed to then was some way contradicted by what I learnt when I came to Australia to study architecture. The study of architecture when I was a student in Australia was very Eurocentric and probably bypassed all forms of black culture altogether. So I was very interested in how they might come together. So I started with some competitions and started with some collaborations with various people, and I got more and more excited about it as it went along, and eventually an opportunity came about to do this project. I had actually tried to get some of my clients to take some of these ideas on board as architectural solutions for their briefs, but in the end the only way that I could see to get any of these ideas out was to do it myself. And I worked in partnership with on this project with Prowla, who is he's a hip hop legend in Melbourne in Australia, and
I'm a big fan of Prowla. So growing up, Prowla had this album called Money Walks. And when I was a teenager, this album was pretty much used as currency within the group that I rolled in, because this is going to show how old I am. Money Walks came out on cassette tape, and he didn't release a lot of them, and it was incredibly rare, and people would literally use that to trade. Like they would, like, I will give you a dub of this if you give me something. Like it was that sought after, and I never had anything valuable enough to give somebody in return for a Money Walks album. So when I found out that Prowla actually helped designing this, it made me love it even more. So what was Prowla's role in this building?
Well, we'd known each other for many years. We'd been involved in lots of music projects together, and in fact in the 90s we were in a band that actually played tracks off that Money Walks album when it had just been released. And I think it does exist on vinyl as well as cassette, actually.
Yes,
there's not many copies floating around.
Yes, I would love to get my hands, like if you hear of anybody who has a copy, I would love to get myself a copy of that on, well, I'd still love the cassette tape, I'm not going to lie, I've been chasing that since I was a teenager, but I would love to get myself the vinyl. That's like the real gem.
For many years, through our involvement in music, we talked about this fantasy of designing and living in our own homes that could somehow reflect our lives and have these hip-hop elements inside them. So it came from almost a just sort of fantasy talk, and then as we got a bit older and these things became more possible, when the opportunity arose to do an apartment project, then we got serious about trying to bring some of those ideas into it. It took a long time. It took about 2 years of working out how that might come together. He did the sketches in the same way that he might prep to do a graffiti piece.
Yes.
You'd prepare in a sketchbook and then you go out and do the piece. He did multiple iterations of sketches that he would bring to my office, and then I would work out ways that we can geometricize them and turn them into into build form, how those shapes and those forms and those gestures, because there's a lot of dynamics in graffiti, and so we're quite interested in how we could get the dynamics to flow in the architecture as well. It's very important that it's not static.
The mural out the front, it's not just the mural, it's actually part of the building, right? The structure, like it is structural. It's purposeful, right?
You say mural, but perhaps mural's not the right word, because a mural means that there's a wall and there's the art. So in this case, the intention is that the wall is the art. The letters are cast in concrete, and they are structural as well. So it's a 4-story building, and most of the loads are coming down through the letter E. And so the letters have actually been fully engineered and are made out of 50 MPa concrete and have a lot of strategic reinforcement inside them. It was the first piece of the building to arrive.
That's crazy.
That's right. And we had to close the street, and then we also had to protect it because we were going to build over it for another year or so.
Tell me a little bit about the Hive. What is the Hive? Is there any meaning behind that? Because I have noticed that it flows throughout the building. There's the honeycomb tiles. I've noticed downstairs you've got the big bee mural. You've got a few other things. Is the Hive something that means anything to you?
Because we're building our first home, the idea of home as Hive as metaphor for home worked quite well. Also, the letters that are in the word Hive are actually quite expressive, and they allowed to show off that sort of early New York subway style of lettering. We sort of picked that as the sort of golden age style of graffiti to work within. That was a good way to achieve that dynamism that we were looking for in the facade.
So this isn't the only project that you've done in this space. Can you tell me a little bit about Easy's, which is also one of my favorite burger joints in Melbourne?
We began working on what we call the end-to-end building in Collingwood. It's actually almost in the same street as this, but in the next suburb. We've employed some of the ideas from this project and developed them into some other areas as well. That one focuses on the golden age of graffiti, particularly in Melbourne, and Graffiti's and Street Cultures Association with those iconic Hitachi trains. They were the canvas for the Melbourne pioneers of graffiti, which interestingly was happening in parallel at the same time, and in direct dialogue with what was going on in New York and the other early formations.
Yeah, like some of my earliest memories. I remember when we first moved to Australia, I was like 5 years old, and my first memories of Melbourne City is seeing the trains covered in graffiti, seeing people literally hanging out of the trains while they were going, just with aerosol cans and fat caps, just riding along them like it was everywhere. I think a lot of people don't quite understand how strong graffiti culture is in Australia. I feel like hip hop has always been here, but the musical side maybe grew a little bit slower than the actual visual side. The visual side is now ingrained in our pop culture in Melbourne. It's not as frowned upon as it was once upon a time. Now the government is sponsoring so many legal graffiti walls and stuff like that. So it's definitely a huge part of Melbourne culture, and I feel so much nostalgia going to Easy's.
It was full strength in the early 80s, which is quite amazing. It's one of the greatest cities in the world for graffiti now. That project, it did work with an element of nostalgia because we were looking to celebrate the birth of this culture. We did take some of the techniques that we had developed here about working in concrete and relief. So the crest of the end-to-end building is a three-dimensional
P, right?
P in relief with a circle around it in a sort of fat cap style. And what we were referencing there was back in the day, if once you'd put your piece on the side of the train, that you might put a P, which stood for panel, and you'd put an arrow so that as the train was oncoming, you'd know which platform to run to see the piece go by. And so then that was a nice emblem and a bit of history to put inside there. And so there are various of those kind of devices inside that building.
I could imagine you working with somebody like Dame and Lumen as well. I could see your styles meshing together and doing something really, really crazy, because they're all about that three-dimensional sphere of graffiti. When I walked into your apartment, I automatically saw the Dame piece walking up the stairway, and I was like,
I'm a long time fan of Dame.
Same.
And, again, that's been a long time inspiration. It would be wild to work with someone like that, because then in that case the graffiti artist, I imagine, would be bringing a lot of the translation, the translation to form, ready-made inside the work. So that would be entirely exciting.
So onto another topic. You're into music as well, which is, I think, pretty obvious. You were showing me your record collection, which is hidden behind me, and I was pretty impressed because I'm a bit of a crate digger myself. What projects have you got going on at the moment? I know you're with the Public Opinion Afro Orchestra and Z6. Do you guys have any big projects on at the moment? Any tours coming up?
Yes, I try to do the music as career. I do architecture and music as career. The Public Opinion Afro Orchestra is sort of 10 years old now, and has done some wonderful things. It was just last week we got to perform with Femi Kuti, who is Afrobeat royalty. We had him and his son Made here from Lagos for a few days, and we did a couple of shows with the Public Opinion Afro Orchestra, and it was it was humbling and cool, inspiring, and and gave us enough inspiration to do another 10 years, I think.
Yes.
We're planning to get over to Lagos to perform at Celebration. We're just getting ready for that at the moment. Also very exciting. Cool. Then I also keep the hip hop alive. I generally have a hip hop project going at any time. I've got this project called Z6 going at the moment, which is a live and recording project that works with jazz and hip hop together, sort of mashes them up, and I'm just about to release an album of jazz standards done through that method. Prowla's involved in that project, and I've dragged all my musical mates into that.
Well, Zvi, thank you so much for inviting me into your home. I've been wanting to see inside of here for a long time, and I now know that you have downstairs as an Airbnb as well, so I'm definitely going to be coming and staying here one night. If anybody else wants to stay here, how do they find it?
Just type in the Hive Graffiti Apartments. It should come straight up.
You were telling me how much it costs, and I actually thought it was pretty unbelievable considering what you get, the artwork that comes with it, and just the experience of staying somewhere so unique. A little bit of a shameless plug for you, but seriously, I think it is so cool. If I was visiting Melbourne for the first time, this is where I would want to stay. I live in Melbourne, and I'm going to book myself in here at some point, because it's a whole vibe being here.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome anytime.